real opportunity there to extend into the winter further with your cattle and maybe get them out onto the pasture sooner in the spring. Now, these are just observations, and I'm reflecting back on where we are in New Zealand. I've looked at your pasture growth curves, and yes, you do have much lower winter pasture growth rates than we do, if I look at that on average, but we have some very low winter growth rates farms too. So, yep, a real opportunity for there. We have this saying that pasture is the cheapest food on the planet. You have a real opportunity to increase your margins if you can reduce the high cost of processed feed.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, Bob Thomson, farm consultant from New Zealand, specialising in sheep and beef, discusses some of his insights into the dairy beef in Ireland in comparison to New Zealand. Bob, you're very welcome to Ireland, and it's great to have you speaking at the DairyBeef conference this week. You have a wealth of experience, Bob, working in extension, consultancy and project management for over the last 50 years. Can you give some background to your career to date?
Yes, my background is in beef and sheep. I've specialised in that my whole career, and I've just chalked up 50 years of work in extension and consultancy. So your listeners may be aware that subsidies for New Zealand farmers were taken away in the mid-80s, and during that time also they took away the extension program that farmers enjoyed. So it was in 1991 that I went out on my own account as a farm consultant. So what did we do different? Well, we were largely associated with getting research out to farmers in our extension role, much the same as what happens here in Ireland. But when moving into consultancy, of course, you now focus more on one-on-one working with farmers rather than on group activities. So, concentrating in on the farmer's business, basically helping them to make more money or to be able to farm smarter.
That's great, Bob. And I suppose from the insights you've gained on the dairy beef farms that you visited this week in comparison to New Zealand, what insights have you?
I guess the big difference is that you have a period where you have your cattle indoors. That does not happen in New Zealand. We have an all pasture farming system. There may be small amounts of supplementation that take place in the depth of winter or to build up feed covers as you go into winter. But the big difference is that you will have your cattle indoors for 4 to 6 months over winter. So, that's the difference.
And in relation to the dairy beef industry in New Zealand, what opportunities or threats do you see here in Ireland?
So thinking about what you do here that we could do and utilise back in New Zealand, I think your genetic evaluation program is outstanding. So the commercial beef value indexes that are available to farmers are amazing. And with that instant feedback on data, because your animals have the parentage sorted through DNA, and the speed with which you get that information back is outstanding. And so we need to be thinking about that. We do have a dairy beef progeny test program, which has been just coming into its 10th year. And that's really valuable to us. We've tested over 200 bulls and 18 different breeds. But if we could link our genetic programs, that would be great. Perhaps anecdotally, perhaps our beef bulls may be behind yours, but we'll wait and see because we'll have the excitement of one of our top bulls being referenced into your genetic evaluation program with the calves that are coming up. So, we're looking forward to that, and we're hoping that we can collaborate more on that genetic front.
That's great, Bob. It'll be interesting to see. From your experience, can you see what opportunities there would be that could be implemented on Irish beef farms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've been asking myself that as I'm going around looking at farms. And I've seen 3 of the DairyBeef 500 farms and 2 of the demonstration farms. So that's been amazing, especially the Tipperary farm. I was very impressed with that. But anyway, thinking about what you're doing that maybe can incorporate some more of what we do in New Zealand, it'd have to be related to getting more pasture into your animals, so extending the time that your animals are out on pasture. Interestingly, your farmers are pushing back on things like poaching, is what you call it. We call it pugging. So this is, where you, pug up the soil and make a bit of a mess, and it doesn't look that great. And our farmers have pushed back on that too, as we've looked at beef systemization, which is perhaps a more intensive way of farming animals on pasture. So real opportunity there to extend into the winter further with your cattle and maybe get them out onto the pasture sooner in the spring. Now, these are just observations, and I'm reflecting back on where we are in New Zealand. I've looked at your pasture growth curves, and yes, you do have much lower winter pasture growth rates than we do, if I look at that on average, but we have some very low winter growth rates farms too. So, yep, a real opportunity for there. We have this saying that pasture is the cheapest food on the planet, and when you have a real opportunity to increase your margins if you can reduce the high cost of processed feed.
Most definitely, the weather plays a huge part in turnout dates and housing dates here in Ireland. What experience are you seeing in New Zealand where they're extending grazing and causing damage to the soil that you mentioned there? What impact is that having on future growth rates?
We've measured that, and just remember our cattle are out on pasture all year. So there's 2 or 3 things that are really important. First is to understand your soils and get them properly profiled. Some of your soils and some of your contours will be more suited to small bulls in their first winter, and other soils will be more appropriate for your bigger and older cattle. So it's about sorting your farm up to understand where your opportunities are, and then having a beef program that matches that. For example, one of my clients has a ratio of, I should just backstep a little bit. Typically, we have 2 winter beef systems, so the 2 winters out on pasture. The first winter, they'll go in around 200 kilos live weight, and the second winter, they'll go into the winter about 400 kilos live weight. So clearly, there's some difference in the potential for animals to poach the soils up. So we put our big cattle on the soils that are best suited to bigger cattle, and likewise with the smaller cattle. So that's important. So the farm I'm just talking about, he has a ratio of 2 little bulls to 1 big bull. He's a bull farmer, but the same could apply if he was a steer or heifer farmer.
How does that compare, Bob, when you talk about stocking rate?
You tend to talk about livestock units. We talk about live weight per hectare. And so we take, you need to set a peg in the ground, if you like, about when you measure that. So we tend to do that on the 1st of May, which I think would be equivalent to the 1st of October for you. So typically in our beef systems, a low stock system would be around 800 kilos of live weight per hectare, and a more heavily stocked system would be more like 1,200. Some are more than that, but those are the round averages of the stocking rate. Now, this is irrespective of whether they are going into their first winter at 200 kilos or their second winter at 400 kilos.
And you're involved with a number of highly successful monitor programme farms in New Zealand, Bob. Can you describe how they work and maybe some similarities or differences you've seen here in Ireland?
So how our monitor farms work, it's a little bit like your demonstration farms, but they're not actually owned by a government organisation. They're owned by the farmers themselves. So we call together a group of farmers in a district or a county, you might call it, and we ask for farms to be nominated as the monitor farm. So that's sorted out between the farmers, and a farm is selected, and it may have involved going around and looking at the 3 nominated farms or more, but the farmers select the farm, and that farm then becomes the monitor farm. It's a 3-year program, and we work with the farmers, like say in my role as facilitating such a program. We would work the business case up for the farmer about what he wants to achieve, and then we use the farmers in the group and of course our own analysis around its policies and etc. to establish the goals for that farm over the 3-year period. Generally, always this is about increasing production and profit, of course. And so there's a process of meeting 4 times a year with the local farmers, and then we call in specialists to help us on specialist topics. That might be around something like managing internal parasites. So we would bring in a specialist to talk about that. It could be around fertilizer application and optimal fertility, soil fertility and things like that. So that operates for those 3 years, and then we have a final wash up in the 3rd year where we look at how well did the farmer do relative to the goals he set and then what he achieved. So in the process, the farmers in the group are seeing and believing about how positive change is made. Pretty similar to your DairyBeef 500 in a lot of ways, because you've got these exemplar farmers in your group, and then you're having field days whereby other farmers come and see what they are doing, and they can see it, not just hear it. So it becomes quite positive. Different but similar, our programs in New Zealand.
That's great, Bob. Perhaps a little bit on building the New Zealand Beef Improvement Group that you're involved with. What is it and what impact is it having?
Well, that group was really born out of one of our farm monitor groups. And so what we were doing is running a series of days on beef quality and looking at, what you could do as a farmer to improve your beef quality. Interestingly, our payment system does not reward beef quality. It's pretty much, we've got a grading system, and yes, it has a fat requirement, but it's pretty basic. Yes, it does have a confirmation grade, but farmers aren't paid for that. And so as we were striving to increase production, and that was all it was about, production, profit. Some of the farmers were saying, well, 1 minute, why don't we start thinking more about getting paid for quality? And so we set about building a program which we come to call the New Zealand Beef Improvement Group, which was about value-based payment. And so we built it from the bottom up. We attracted a big chunk of, by New Zealand standards, a big chunk of money from Technology New Zealand, a government agency that did have money available to help new businesses get up and established. And so this is what we did. And we had quickly had 120 farmers signed in. We were in Northland, the most northern part of New Zealand, which is a beef zone. And we had a cooperating meat company that was interested in feeding us back things like fat colour, meat colour, pH, those sorts of things, including a confirmation score. So, we had it all set up to go. But what we needed was a meat company to buy into that. That eventually happened, and so some of those sorts of things are absorbed into our local meat processors. And so was it successful? I guess is the key answer. And I think probably we'd have to say, yes, it was, in terms of building up farmers' awareness on how you could better manage cattle for better pH outcomes, for example, and then understanding about what those core things were. Did it end up being realised in a payment system? And the answer, I'm afraid to say, is no. So disappointingly, that wasn't fully realised commercially, although there was a huge amount of learning that occurred in amongst all of us in understanding about how we could produce a better quality product.
And in relation to the Landcorp Beef Cows for Profit programme, we hear a lot about the dairy industry in New Zealand, but very little from the suckler beef side of things. What was that and what was the results from it?
Landcorp in New Zealand, they're a government agency, and they owned a lot of land. And on that land, they had 15,000 breeding cows spread basically from the far north to the far south of New Zealand. And so because I was a beef specialist and I spent quite a lot of time working in the space with breeding cows, they asked if I would come and help using like a farm monitor process, their farm managers to increase cow performance. So we had cows spread from the top of the North Island. We had what we called a focus farm in Northland. We had another in the North Island. We had another one on the east coast of the North Island, another focus farm there. And likewise, we had another one down in Southland. So 3 focus farms, and what happens very like our farm monitor farms, the farm managers cluster together on the focus farm once a quarter, so 4 times a year. And again, we set goals around increasing calving percentage and weaning weight. Those were our 2 core things. We were limited by the fact that Landcorp had dictated that they would be only using Angus cows, so we weren't able to use, say, a Hereford Angus and make perhaps some of the cows off to a terminal sire like a Limousin or a Charolais or Simmental or whatever. So we were just confined to Angus on Angus. And so the goal was, as I say, to increase calving percentage and weaning weight. And of course, spread across the cows that they had in the country, that was absolutely huge. So I think I said 15,000 cows at the beginning, but in fact, there was 12,000 cows in Northland, 15,000 cows on the east coast, and another 12,000 cows down in Southland at the bottom of the South Island. So it's quite a big program. So clearly, if we made small increases in calving percentage, numbers of calves born and weaned, and weaning weight, we would produce a lot more beef. So how did it go? We made good progress, particularly with calving percentage on one of our herds. But the other thing to do with breeding cows in New Zealand is they're used to complement sheep performance. So they groom pastures, like they can eat up all that rough pasture and prepare pastures for high performance sheep. And so we're manipulating body condition score on cows. We have a body condition score of 1 to 10. And so the idea was that as we went into winter, we'd use fat on the back of the cows like hay in the barn. And we would use the cows to prep the pastures, eat up all the rough stuff that was left over from summer, the summer surplus or spring-summer surplus, and in the process eat that low-quality feed, reduce their feed intake, and make that feed available to other stock classes that would reward the farmer at a much higher level. And then understand about post-calving feeding and how that you can take cows down to body condition score 5. I think you've got a 1 to 5 score, so that might be 2.5 on your scale. And then get them back up another condition score higher by the time they went back to the bull. So we're able to demonstrate by manipulating body condition score, which is an easy thing to measure, even out in the paddock, that you could save a lot of feed and maintain a high calving percentage. That was one of the key outcomes from it. And the other, of course, is in the process, increase the weaning weight of the calves. So a successful program on most of the farms, not all of them, as often the case with these sorts of programs.
Bob, you mentioned in relation to farm systemization that it's the best pathway to realising improved economic, environmental and social outcomes on sheep and beef farms. What do you mean by that?
Because we're all grass farmers, we know a lot about rotational grazing and the benefits of that. Now, what we've done with beef systemization is take another step up. It's so much easier to subdivide for cattle than it is for sheep. Of course, we can use electric fencing. And so this is what we do. So imagine this. Take a 15-hectare paddock. Imagine it being divided up with 2-wire electric fencing into 15 1-hectare cells. We call them cells. Every cell has water, and we've got some very good ways of providing water at low cost into these systems. So the two ways you might do that. One is with what we call micro troughs, which are small troughs around about 200 to 250 mils across, and there's a little pad on there. When the animal nudges that pad, water is released to them. The other way is to have a trough in the middle of the paddock. And so what happens, imagine the 15 cells again, each cell has water, and then for winter, so around the beginning of May, late April, those paddocks are temporarily subdivided into 4. So imagine that, 15 paddocks times 4. Now we have 60 paddocks. Now, one of the other things that we talk a lot about is shift frequency. So with a 2-day shift frequency, which we think is ideal, we will end up with a 120-day rotation. And so what we're talking about is rationing off the feed across winter such that we can carry the optimum amount of weight over winter so we can utilise the maximum amount of feed that it is possible in the spring. You know, we're always going to have a surplus in the spring, but the idea is to try and carry as much live weight across the winter so we increase our feed demand into the spring. So these systems, and there's quite a lot more to talk about with them, but that's the basic principle, is achieving a long winter rotation. Now, how we operate with you would feed supplements, well, we don't, but what we do is build up a big feed cover as we go into winter. And the pasture cover is like feed in the barn, and that will be rationed off over the winter. So there you go. And basically, the lower your winter live weight gain, pasture live weight gain, I should say, the longer your winter rotation will be. So in the north of the North Island, 60 days. Where I am in the Waikato, 80 days. And in the bottom of the South Island, it would be more like 160 days. So there you go. I think you have opportunity to do some of this sort of thing in Ireland. We get great performance out of our systems, and what it's done in New Zealand is whenever a farmer's established a beef system that operates properly, they double production and profit. So it's a big deal.
Some great insights there, Bob. Thanks very much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your trip in Ireland.
Oh, I'm loving it. And as I said before, the people have been amazing. And I've seen some, 3 of the 15 DairyBeef 500 farms and a couple of demonstration farms. So, yeah, one at Grange and the other at Tipperary. So I've been very fortunate. Thank you.
That's all for this week. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.